Hello, everyone. This week we're going to do things a little bit differently. Both because I'm asking you to watch this video before you do the reading, but also the nature of the video itself. It's not going to be about any of the diseases for the week. Instead, it's going to be background information that I think you can use to better understand, especially the readings in Garrett, because she makes reference to a number of terms and issues and so on, that even those of us who've spent the last 2 years living through a pandemic maybe aren't as familiar with as we should be. And this information will also be important for the next few weeks as well, pretty much the rest of the semester. All right, so if you're with me, we're going to do a little intro to immunology. All right, yes, it's going to be almost as much fun as you think it is. Okay, so what do we got going here? We're looking at immunity, immune response, and vaccines. Okay. Whoops. Or actually what we're looking at is my screen there. There we go. All right. So what happens when a pathogen enters the body? Well, I guess first question is, what is a pathogen, right? A pathogen is an organism that has the potential to infect an individual and cause disease. So it's a general term. A pathogen can be obviously a bacterium, can be a virus, can be a parasite, right? Those are all pathogens. They're pathogenic in that they're disease causing. That's what it means, okay? So a pathogen entering a body with a functioning immune system, hopefully yours is functioning, will trigger an immune response, right? The immune response can be triggered by a natural exposure or by a vaccine, okay? So what happens next, right? So a couple of terms to get out of the way besides pathogen: antigens. A lot of gens here, right? Okay. Antigens are proteins on the surface of a pathogen that prompt the production of antibodies by the immune system. Usually, what you'll hear explained again and again is antigens are basically like a lock, okay? And the antibodies are a key that fits into it. Okay? That's probably a pretty good explanation. Anyway, antibodies, also known as immunoglobulin, is a large protein used by the immune system to identify and neutralize foreign objects such as pathogenic bacteria and viruses. All right. Okay, so we got antigens, a lot of antis here too. Antigens, proteins on the surface of a pathogen, and antibodies, which are produced by your body. Okay? How does this work? Now, this is very simplified. When I taught this class before, I used this World Health Organization PowerPoint, 40 slides, designed for field workers and so on. And yeah, it just didn't go over. So I simplified it down here a little bit. All right. Okay. So what happens? Pathogen enters the body, right? It has antigens, once again, on the surface. That antigen is picked up by an antigen-presenting cell that shows the antigen to a type of immune cell called a helper T cell, CD4 cells. Okay? Helper T cells activate B cells, which also make antibodies, or killer T cells that attack the pathogen. The activated B cells and killer T cells become memory immune cells that will reactivate during actual infection and keep the pathogen from invading. Okay, and once your body starts producing these memory cells, it keeps producing, because as you probably know, hopefully, most cells in your body don't live very long. And most cells in the immune system last for at most a few days. All right, so if you get infected and your body produces the memory cells, it keeps producing the same type. So you can recognize a disease, if it, or a pathogen if you're infected with it, if you've been infected before. Okay? And the end result of the immune response, ideally, is you have the end result is the creation of memory cells that are equipped to respond to future invasions of the same antigen, right? Okay. Now, of course, that also presumes that if you have the same pathogen, that it hasn't mutated enough or developed different antigens on its surface. If so, as the Brits would say, we're all buggered, right? Okay. All right. So here is a nice little graphical representation. Okay. So what happens? We got a B cell here. That's our little purple guy. All right. And the little green mean looking ones are bacteria. Right. And what's the red one piece then? That's the antigen, right? Okay. The B cell finds an antigen which matches its receptors. The lock and key issue here, right? Okay. It waits until it is activated by a helper T cell. There we go. There's the helper T cell. You can see it's helpful because it's smiling, right? Okay. Then the B cell divides, produces, come back here. Produces plasma cells and memory cells. The plasma cells produce antibodies that attach to the current type of invader, okay? And then eater cells come along and they prefer invaders that are marked with these antibodies. Okay, it's a way to target them. Okay, so your immune system then produces these plasma cells that produce antibodies that basically mark the bacteria as targets, and then the eater cells, phagocytes from the Greek, come in and eat them up, right? Okay. Then what's left is the memory cell. Okay, if the same intruder invades again, memory cells help the immune system to activate much faster. Right? You're basically primed for this. All right? So that's how immunity works essentially in your body and in your bloodstream. Interestingly enough, this is referred to as humoral immunity. We just can't get away from Galen. You know, Galen's idea of the humors. Well, that's why it's called humoral immunity, not because it's funny. Galen's influence is long and deep. Okay, all right. Let's move on to immunizations and vaccinations. Starting with definitions of terms. So, immunization, a process by which a person becomes protected against a disease through vaccination. Immunization is what happens essentially in the body. And point of fact, of course, the terms are often used interchangeably. People will talk about getting an immunization or a vaccination. Once again, I think I mentioned this before. This is where that, jerk Aaron Rodgers, was like, people ask him if he was vaccinated against COVID. He's like, yeah, I've been immunized. Well, no, he wasn't vaccinated though. Okay. And he knew he wasn't vaccinated. He was lying. So, and I'm really upset to see the Packers doing so poorly this year, but I digress. Anyway, so yes, immunization can be used interchangeably with vaccination, but it's technically not the same thing. Okay. A vaccination, is the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce immunity. Immunization is the immune response, right? A process by which you become protected against disease, okay? And obviously a vaccination occurs with a vaccine. And a vaccine then produces immunity to a specific disease. Sometimes, as we'll see in the reading this week, there's a little bit of crossover. People who have developed an immune reaction, for example, to some types of flu, will have an immune response to different types of flu. Okay, classic influenza versus swine flu, for example. Garrett will talk about that. The immune response won't be as strong, but it'll be something. Okay? Okay. So first, I had antibody therapy, then variolization, as we saw in the smallpox a week we did, and then vaccination. Okay. Now, before we had vaccines for a lot of things, and this was true during the Spanish flu outbreak in 1918, we used serum immunity. Okay. Treatment with antibodies, often from animals. Okay. So blood serum, and that's the clear part of your blood, not the red blood cells and so on. Usually you take blood, you put it in a centrifuge, spins very fast, and the items of a different weight will separate out, and you can take the serum out. Whereas red blood cells must be typed and given to a certain type. Serum or plasma can be given to almost anyone. Even in this case, serum from a different animal. Okay, so let's go back. So blood serum from persons, animals whose bodies have built up antibodies is called antiserum or immune serum. Inoculation with such an antiserum provides temporary or passive immunity against a disease. That is used when a person has already been exposed to or has contracted the disease. So it's a type of treatment. It's not a preventative, as a vaccine would be as such. But as I started to say, this is what was used during the Spanish flu, which of course in 1918 is caused by a virus. Don't have any treatment for viruses. They would infect horses with the flu, and then drain their blood, take out the blood serum or anti-serum, and use that to treat people, believe it or not. So hospitals and clinics had to keep stables and stables of horses, so they could keep, taking their blood out over and over, so they could use the anti-serum. Obviously expensive, and it's impossible to produce enough to treat, well, in a pandemic, all of the people who are affected. But it somewhat effective in its way. But it's a treatment, once again, not a preventative. Okay, types of vaccines. There are live, or often called attenuated, which means weakened, virus vaccines. There are, I misspelled vaccine there, inactivated or killed vaccines, which use a whole virus or bacteria that is killed or neutralized. There are protein subunit vaccines that use just the antigens or the proteins on bacteria. Okay, that's some antigens are better at sparking the immune response. Your body responds to some better, and also to separate the parts of a pathogen that cause disease and then from those that produce an antibody response. There was a problem with some of the early polio vaccines that used an attenuated live virus, because some people could develop polio from those, which of course is not really what you want, right? So even though the fact is that using the attenuated viral vaccine produces a stronger immune response, okay? That's why they would do it. You can use an inactivated or killed vaccine or bacteria, immune response isn't as strong. It's always a balance of these things. Anyway, fourth type is recombinant vaccines made from individual viral proteins. And fifth is polysaccharide vaccines that use the sugars on the surface of certain bacteria. The sixth type, which is just developed in the last couple of years, I don't have here actually, I should add that, is the messenger RNA vaccines, and that's what one of the COVID vaccines is. And of course, any of these other types are good because you don't use the actual pathogen, you're using parts of it, right? So there is no chance of becoming ill from that vaccine because it doesn't contain the pathogen as a whole, right? Okay. As we moved from variolation to vaccination, we can see a number of the vaccines still today contain attenuated or weakened microbes. The measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, smallpox, chickenpox, and yellow fever. Killed microbes, inactivated vaccines is hepatitis A, influenza, and rabies. Right? Okay. And I think I showed you this before. We talked a little bit about vaccination before, but without the immunology lesson. If you look at the impact in the U.S. Of vaccines, it's been very strong. We've taken measles down. This is up through 2019 from annual morbidity or annual number of cases of over 500,000 to about 1,300. Right? Pertussis, which is whooping cough, very nasty disease in young children, taking it from about 200,000 cases a year to 15,000. For some reason, people don't like to get vaccinated as much against that one. mumps down, and then as you can see, some of these things, smallpox, polio, down at or near zero. I say near zero because there's been a slight resurgence in polio, as there's a newer generation of people who aren't vaccinated. And of course, you're not going to get vaccinated, diseases are going to come back. Anyway, and as just one example here from measles, as you can see, when the year where they introduced the vaccine, was it 64, I think it was, and the number of cases then were in some states, for some reason, Montana there was not too good. You would have thousands of cases a year. Those are the red squares. Utah, Vermont, a lot of rural areas, I guess, lack of access to health care. Anyway, and then you get the vaccine introduced and it virtually disappears. So vaccines can be quite effective is the lesson here, right? Now, vaccination versus natural immunity, and this is something people have been debating about, I know, with COVID. In general, natural immunity is stronger and more durable than vaccine immunity. In some cases, immune response from a natural infection can mean lifelong immunity. And that's what we get in the case of chickenpox or measles or yellow fever. However, of course, natural immunity has side effects, including it up to death, right? If you have to experience or develop natural immunity means you have to be infected, right? And you may have heard stories about, parents not wanting to vaccinate their kids against chickenpox and having chickenpox parties and, getting intentionally infecting their kids. I got to tell you, bad idea in the case of chickenpox. Yes, you are a lifelong immunity to chickenpox, but the chickenpox virus stays in your body and never leaves. And then later in life, you can develop shingles. I developed shingles because I had chickenpox as a kid. And I got to tell you, it's a pretty nasty thing. And so I don't recommend that. I'm based on my study of history and especially my experiences in Africa, I'm a big fan of vaccinations. Anytime I go to Africa, I take all of them that I possibly can, and the other problem with natural immunity, of course, is once again mutations, right? Viruses, bacteria mutate. And if different strains emerge, the immune response to one may not protect the person from a different one. Whereas, of course, typically they update vaccines like they do, different versions of the flu vaccine every year. So in some ways you don't technically have a stronger immunity, but you have sometimes a more, up-to-date immunity, let's say. Okay? Why do most vaccines require more than one dose? Well, once again, vaccines don't produce as strong an immune response as natural infection, and so it tends to decline over time. And so you need boosters or additional doses to help boost the immune response in the body. Kind of wake it up and remind those B cells to make memory cells and to have a new flood of memory cells in your blood so that so they're on the lookout for that particular pathogen, right? Okay. Now, the other thing we hear about is herd immunity, and Garrett talks about this a little bit, that when there are many vaccinated or otherwise immune individuals in a community, there is nowhere for a bacteria or virus to go, and the group or herd becomes immune. We saw some of this, we saw discussions of this back in the Muslim texts, right, in the 8th, 9th century. So typically, the more infectious the organism or the more easily it's spread, the higher percent of people that need to be immune for herd immunity to come into effect. We don't always know the exact number. Garrett talks about that. The rough benchmark is somewhere around 80%. Okay, but this is what it looks like. If you have on the top line there, no vaccinations. Okay, you have a red dot, one infectious person. Well, say this person becomes infected, right? Well, as they move to the next stage, they will be immune, but they've already spread it to the people around them. And the people then who get the disease early will become immune, but it's going to spread essentially through the entire herd or community, right? And this is one of the examples that Garrett was talking about this week, talking about urban centers, right? I mean, you've got these population centers, and it's just simply the density of the population that has the effect, right? Now, the second line, if you have 75% vaccinated, you can see what happens is if you have an infected individual, there's no place for them to go, okay? They can just infect the unvaccinated blue people around them, but then there's a wall of green that pretty much cuts it off, okay? So it doesn't have any place to go. That's with something that's, you know, not very infectious. That's what the RO2 means. It means not very infectious. RO5 means more infectious, so it can spread further. You create these colonies or clusters, as you see here and here and here, and you end up with more disease. This is at 75% vaccinated. Once again, general presumption is that you need about 80%. The more infectious, though, the higher level you need. It might be 85% you really need to create a herd immunity to protect people. And the herd immunity is also very important, especially if you have a population with a lot of people who are susceptible, a lot of elderly or underlying health conditions. You know, me with coronary disease. My wife's got high blood pressure, you know, so we you know go stay home during COVID and get vaccinated. Anyway, okay. After I'm done here, I want you to watch this documentary that deals with viruses, vaccines, and new disease. You're not going to believe me if I tell you where it comes from, okay? I'll tell you anyway. Have you ever seen the Will Smith movie? I know Will Smith is, you know, on the outs these days, but you ever seen the Will Smith movie, I Am Legend? Okay. It was actually a remake of a Charlton Heston movie called Omega Man from back in the day, if you remember Charlton Heston in the 1970s. Anyway, Will Smith did I Am Legend. It's been updated, and it's also been updated medically. And so it's basically about this pathogen that mutates, gets out, and basically turns people into flesh-eating zombies. All right? This video deals with the science behind it. But, oh my God, you're not going to believe this. This was made, I don't know, 8-10 years ago when that movie came out. And this was a bonus feature on the DVD. But it's awesome. It's got everybody from the CDC in there, up to and including Anthony Fauci. He's talking about SARS viruses, which, of course, this is before COVID-19, right? But COVID-19 is a SARS virus. He's talking about natural reservoirs of disease, including bats. I mean, the whole thing is laid out in there. You're not going to believe it. So if you haven't seen this, you've got to. It's just mind-blowing how well they nailed this like a decade ago of what was coming, you know? And we'll talk about that more the last week of class when we talk about COVID. Okay, that's what I wanted to get through today. I'll put the link for this on the agenda. And all right, well, have a good week. Thank you.